A hikikomori is someone who's isolated themselves both physically and socially from the outside world. Be it society, friends, or family, hikikomori are bogged down by the guilt of not being able to live up to expectations of others. They are ridden with feelings of sadness, regret, and loneliness, and it isn't something that can be cured overnight, or at all if it goes on for too long. But what if this was all a conspiracy? A plan set in motion by an evil organization, controlling these people from the shadows.
日本引きこもり協会
NHK にようこそ
Welcome to the NHK is an anime that shows us what it's like to live as a hikikomori, but it explores so much more than that. Themes of distrust, addiction, manipulation, and suicide are laced throughout the show. In essence, Welcome to the NHK is an anime that explores the frailty of humanity and how easy it is to fall into this vicious cycle of self-doubt and loneliness. The show pulls no punches, as it shows us how cruel the world can be if it's viewed with such a negative lens, and we see it all through the eyes of our protagonist, Tatsuhiro Sato. Sato had been living as a hikikomori for 4 years. After dropping out of college when he was 19, he lived day in and day out in his apartment, in constant denial that he'd become a hikikomori. That is, until he met a young girl named Misaki, who was willing to help him get his life back together. In redemption stories, the protagonist is usually shown to have a steady progression, until finally they have a change of heart, or at least have a more positive outlook on the world. There may be a few bumps along the way, but nothing too serious, because you know they're going to come around by the end of the episode, always headed in a positive direction. For Sato, it seems that with each new plot point, he just goes deeper and deeper into despair. Sure, he gets out of these situations, but he's always going back to square one, which, quite frankly, was pretty low to begin with. And while there are moments where he does show some determination to turn his life around, there's always something that brings him back down to reality. Sometimes it's an environmental factor, but most of the time, it's his mental health that always seems to deteriorate any semblance of hope he may have. And I can't blame him. A lot of the times, people who suffer from things like depression know that they can't keep going on like this. But it's not easy to just up and leave as you please. Life is hard when all you've done for months or maybe years is be by your lonesome, living in constant fear that people are going to judge you for, well, anything. As a result, you become vulnerable and look for anything that can prove that you're worth a damn, something you can use to escape the harsh reality of it all. We've seen Sato indulge himself in adult content and video games, which ultimately led to an addiction. While it distracted him from his problems, it also distracted him from his commitment and responsibilities to his friend Yamazaki. Later on, he got roped into a pyramid scheme by a former classmate, but it got real bad when he unknowingly agreed to participate in a suicide party on a remote island. Time after time, he was forced to face reality. Time and time again, he was right back where he started, wondering what he was doing with his life. All the while, his mind continues to make him believe that everything was a lie. Unfortunately, Sato isn't the only one dealing with personal demons. Hitomi Kashiwa was Sato's upperclassman. Going off their relationship with each other, she played a part in feeding Sato's poor mental health. Due to her having suicidal tendencies and constantly bringing up conspiracies, Hitomi had a frail heart and didn't believe she had any self-worth. She wanted to find someone who could prove that she was worth something. Yamazaki struggled with his crush, but the bigger issue he faced was with his parents. When he started college, his life had already been planned out by his family, laying out that he'd eventually take over his father's ranch. That's why he wanted so badly for his dreams of becoming a game developer to work out, but he ultimately had to move back to Hokkaido due to his father's poor health. With Hitomi living out her new life with her husband, and Yamazaki leaving Tokyo, Misaki was the only person Sato had left.
やっぱり外に出て働くのが怖くなった？引きこもりだから。でもきっと大丈夫。私引きこもりの脱出方法知ってるから。それに佐藤くんのことだってずっと前から知ってるよ。私ね、佐藤くんのことを助けに来たの。プロジェクトにようこそ。
Aside from wanting to help Sato, Misaki hadn't revealed anything about herself to anyone. Like Hitomi, Misaki wanted to prove that she was worth something to someone. When she found Sato, someone who she thought was more worthless than herself, she wanted to help him get out of his hikikomori lifestyle. Whether this was out of genuine good intentions, or a selfish act to feed her own agenda, isn't necessarily clear. Perhaps she did genuinely care for him towards the end, but was everything before that a lie? Fact of the matter is, she's terrified at the thought of losing Sato, be it because of death or him not finding any use for her anymore. It's pretty disgusting to find out that you're just being used as a test subject. This is one of the many themes the show touches upon, the fact that people look down on one another to make themselves feel superior. They're scared to admit that they themselves are worthless, so they brand others as worthless. Sometimes it's people they'd never even met before, all because they're too afraid to accept themselves or admit that they need to change who they are. Welcome to the NHK is, for lack of better words, an ugly show. And I feel that it's a show that hits harder the older you are. Back when I first watched the show in high school, I didn't know what it was like to be constantly afraid of being judged, nor did I understand how frail humans really are. I never took the time to understand depression or mental health until I experienced it myself. Back in college, I was miserable. I had no friends, I didn't want to talk to anyone, and I was afraid to let my parents know how bad I was doing. All the times Sato was in his room alone. All the times Yamazaki told him to get his life together. All the times Sato denied that he needed help. I felt all of that. Each episode that went on felt like a bigger and bigger pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. That is, until I reached the end. Out of sheer desperation, Sato finally leaves his room and gets a job. He managed to conquer most of his hikikomori lifestyle and was finally able to live a normal life. If you have a faint of heart, I don't think the series is right until you're mentally prepared for what's to come. That being said, this is one of the best depictions of mental health in animation out there, and if you're ready for it, then I welcome you to the NHK.